I didn't expect the story to start like this. I didn't expect to hear her voice shaking as she said, "I've never ridden like this, not until the rancher decided I should be his wife." The moment she said those words, something in me froze. You could hear the fear in her breath, not the kind that makes you scream, the kind that makes you silent because you know one wrong move could end everything. She wasn't riding for fun. She wasn't even riding for a challenge. She was riding because her life depended on it. The hooves of her horse hit the dry ground so fast, it sounded like a heartbeat out of control. Her heartbeat. She didn't look back at first. She said she was too scared to risk it, too scared to see if he was already behind her, too scared to see if his shadow was getting closer. All she could think about was the rancher's voice from earlier that evening. Calm, cold, final. The way he said she would stay there forever because he had decided she should be his wife. Not asked, not hoped, decided. And now she was out here in the dark, pushing her horse harder than she ever had. The wind slapped her face. Her hands burned from holding the reins too tight, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. She said every breath she took felt like borrowed time. And the worst part, she knew he was coming. She could feel it long before she heard anything at all. When she first stepped into that dusty little town, no one knew her name. No luggage, no family, no home behind her. Just a worn coat, a tired horse, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much in too little time. People were used to strangers passing through, but there was something different about her. Something quiet, something heavy. The kind of weight a person carries only when they've left a life behind or escaped one. She didn't speak much. She didn't smile. She didn't ask for anything except a place to water her horse and somewhere she could earn a small wage. I remember the way folks looked at her, curious but cautious. Out here in the Wild West, everyone knows danger doesn't always ride into town with guns showing. Sometimes it walks in looking like a tired woman trying to disappear. She tried to move unnoticed, but it was impossible. Travelers attract attention, especially when they seem desperate not to. The bartender said she kept her eyes low, her answers short. She ate little, spoke less, and jumped any time a door slammed too hard. When someone asked where she came from, she didn't lie, but she didn't tell the truth either. She just said she was moving on, and people respected that. Around here, everyone has something they're trying to leave behind. Still, even if she wanted to slip through town like a shadow, fate didn't let her. Work was scarce, money even scarcer, and that's how she ended up at the ranch, his ranch. She learned about it from an old woman sweeping her porch. A ranch far outside town needed extra hands. The work was rough, the pay steady, and the owner wasn't known to ask many questions. That last part seemed to matter most to her. She thanked the woman, mounted her horse, and rode out toward the hills. No one knew what she expected to find. Honestly, I don't think she knew either. The ranch sat alone on a broad piece of land, almost swallowed by the open plains. Fences stretched for miles. Horses roamed like they owned the earth. The house was strong, sturdy, and quiet. The kind of place that looked like it was built for peace or isolation. She said the ranch owner watched her ride in from the porch. She didn't know then how closely he was watching. She just thought he was another man trying to judge whether a stranger was trouble. Out here, that's normal. He didn't smile when she introduced herself. He didn't frown either. Just studied her like he was trying to figure out why she looked so tired. She asked for work. He looked her up and down, considering. She expected him to say no. She didn't look like someone who could handle ranch work. But instead he nodded and said, "You ride," she told him she did. He said, "Show me." She mounted the nearest horse and rode with a calm confidence he didn't expect. She wasn't flashy, she didn't show off. But she knew how to move with the animal, not against it. She didn't hold the reins tight or fight for control. She just flowed. When she finished the short ride, he didn't ask anything else. He simply told her there was an empty bunkhouse she could use and work starting at dawn. She didn't realize then how much that decision would shape everything that came after. Her days settled into a routine. Hard work from morning until dusk. cleaning stalls, feeding livestock, repairing fences. She rode the horses, trained the younger ones, calmed the restless ones. She wasn't loud or social, but she was steady and dependable. And on a ranch, that earns respect fast. The other ranch hands liked her well enough. They didn't pry. They didn't flirt. Something about her made them keep their distance, not out of dislike, but out of respect for her invisible walls. She wasn't cold, just guarded, like someone who wanted peace but didn't trust she deserved it. She said working there felt like breathing again. For the first time in a long time, she felt almost safe. Not fully, never fully, but enough to make her believe she could start rebuilding some tiny piece of herself. And then there was the rancher. At first, he barely spoke to her, just watched from a distance. He saw how early she woke, how late she worked, how she never complained. He saw how she treated the animals with patience instead of force. He saw how she avoided trouble, avoided questions, avoided connections. She thought he was simply keeping an eye on a new worker. She didn't think much of it, but he noticed everything. He watched her ride with a kind of focus that made some of the other hands uncomfortable. But she didn't see it. She was too busy trying to stay invisible, too busy trying to bury her past, too busy trying not to hope for anything better. The town folks only saw glimpses of her afterward, a rare supply trip, a quiet visit for essentials. She didn't stay long. She didn't want anyone recognizing her if they'd heard stories from wherever she'd come from. She always kept her head down, her horse close, and her guard up. One evening, when she returned from town, she found the rancher waiting for her near the barn. She thought something was wrong with one of the horses. Instead, he told her he noticed how good she was at calming the younger stallions. He praised her work, something he rarely did for anyone. She nodded, thanked him, and tried to walk past. But he stopped her by saying something she didn't expect. "You belong here." She froze when he said it, not because it sounded kind, but because it sounded final, like he wasn't offering a place, he was defining one. She brushed it off, told herself she was imagining things. Told herself she'd been scared of every shadow for so long that even normal words felt threatening. She tried to ignore the unease building in her stomach. But the thing about unease is this: it grows, quietly, slowly, and always for a reason. She didn't know it then, but that ranch, the place she hoped would hide her, was about to become the very place she needed to escape from. And the man she thought was simply her employer was already imagining something she never agreed to. He wasn't the kind of man people feared at first glance. That's what made him confusing and dangerous in a quiet way. He had the look of someone carved from the land itself. Broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, hands worn from years of work. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice came out steady, the kind that felt like it could settle a storm or cause one. No one in town ever said a bad word about him. They said he was fair, dependable, and respected. But respect can look a lot like fear if you stare at it long enough. When she first met him, she saw only a man who offered her safety. Not kindness, not warmth, just space, distance, silence. And that was enough. She didn't want someone asking questions. She didn't want pity or curiosity or attention. She just wanted to work without being seen. He gave her that, or at least it looked like he did. He watched her work from a distance, always calm, always quiet, the kind of watchfulness you don't notice right away. She said she only realized it weeks later when she caught herself adjusting her behavior because she didn't want him to see her struggle. She didn't know why she cared. Maybe she thought earning his approval meant she had a secure place for a while. Maybe she was tired of feeling judged. Or maybe she was just starved for someone to see her as capable instead of broken. Every morning she woke before sunrise. She always found him already outside, checking the fences or feeding the horses. He would nod once in her direction. Never a smile, never warmth, just that nod. A wordless signal that the day had begun. And strangely, that small gesture felt grounding, predictable, safe. He worked beside her sometimes. Not often, but enough that she learned his habits. He didn't brag, he didn't shout, he didn't waste time. He moved like someone who'd lived the same life for so long, Nothing surprised him anymore. She admired that. She almost envied it. When he handed her tools or showed her how to fix something, he didn't look at her the way other men had in the past. He didn't stare too long, didn't smirk, didn't act like she owed him anything. He just existed, and she didn't realize how much she needed that kind of quiet until she found it. The horses seemed to understand her better than most people did. She could calm ones that others struggled with. She could ride the temperamental ones without fear. And every time the rancher watched her work with them, something shifted in his expression. Not admiration exactly, something heavier, something she didn't understand at the time. He started giving her more responsibilities, not because she asked, because he decided she could handle them. He trusted her with the younger horses, the ones bred to be sold for high prices. He trusted her to oversee feed schedules, to manage supply orders when he was away, even to keep an eye on the ranch hands, all without ever asking her what she wanted. She told herself this was a good thing, that it meant he respected her, that he valued her work, and maybe part of him did. But there was always another layer beneath the surface, one she didn't see at first. He began to appear beside her more often, not in a threatening way, just quietly there. When she finished her tasks early, he noticed. When she looked tired, he told her to take a break. When she pushed herself too hard, he stepped in and took the reins from her hands. And it was strange, because all of it felt protectively gentle, not forceful. But still, it was more attention than she expected, more involvement than she asked for. One afternoon, while she was brushing down a mare, she said she felt someone watching her. Not glaring, not judging, just watching. She turned and saw him standing there in the barn doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. He didn't apologize. He simply said, "You're good with them," and then walked off. Those moments kept happening. Brief, quiet, lingering, like he was studying her, like he was memorizing her. The ranch hands began to notice too. They stepped carefully around her, more out of respect for their boss's unspoken interest than fear of her. They joked less. They kept their distance. They treated her differently without ever explaining why. She didn't understand it then, but they were trying not to be the reason the rancher ever got angry. And the rancher, well, he was the kind of man no one wanted to see angry. Once, when she took a fall off a wild stallion, he was at her side faster than anyone else. His hands gripped her arms, checking for injuries, his voice low but sharp with worry. She tried to laugh it off, but he didn't. He stared at her like the idea of her being hurt was unacceptable. When she stood on her own, he refused to let her ride again that day. Not as a suggestion, an order. She brushed it off as concern, maybe even kindness. But later that night, when she replayed the moment in her mind, something felt strange. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke her name, slow, firm, like it was something he owned, not something she carried. She started noticing other things after that. The way he always seemed to know where she was. The way he appeared whenever she was alone. The way he stepped between her and any stranger who came to the ranch. The way his voice changed when he talked to her. Lower, slower, warmer. She didn't want to misjudge him. She didn't want to believe he meant anything by it. She had been wrong about people before, and it had cost her more than she wanted to remember. She didn't want to repeat that mistake, so she convinced herself it was harmless, that he was simply a man who appreciated her work, that maybe he saw her as a reliable hand, nothing else. But the uneasy feeling inside her didn't fade. It grew. One evening, after a long day, she looked up and found him watching her again, this time from the porch, where he stood with his hat in his hands like he was thinking too hard about something. Their eyes met. He didn't look away. He held her gaze for a long moment, long enough for her heart to stutter in a way she didn't understand. And then he said something that stayed with her. "You don't have to run anymore." She hadn't told him she ran from anything. She hadn't told anyone. That was the moment she realized he wasn't just noticing her. He was studying her, claiming space around her, filling every silence with meaning she never asked for. And she didn't know yet just how far he was willing to go. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part that unsettled me the most when she told it. Everything shifted inch by inch, so quietly that she barely noticed until she was standing in the middle of something she never agreed to. Something that felt less like kindness and more like a cage. At first, it was small things. He started appearing beside her before she even realized he was nearby. She'd be tightening a saddle, and suddenly he would be handing her the straps. She'd be hauling feed, and he'd take the heavier sack from her arms without saying a word. She told me she appreciated the help, anyone would. But it was the way he watched her after, like he expected a certain reaction. Like she was supposed to show gratitude in a specific way he had already decided. The ranch hands began whispering, not loud enough for her to hear the words, but enough for her to feel the shift. They watched her differently, not like a coworker, more like someone they weren't allowed to upset. She didn't understand why until one of them accidentally let something slip. "Just don't get him riled up," he mumbled when she asked why everyone went quiet whenever she walked into the barn. Riled up? About what? About who? She laughed it off at the time, but the unease stayed. It followed her through every chore, every meal, every quiet moment she tried to claim for herself. The rancher started inserting himself into decisions she used to make alone. She used to choose which horse to work with each morning. But one day, he walked up behind her and said, "Not that one. Take the chestnut mare instead." No explanation, no discussion, just a decision made for her. The next day it happened again, and again, and again. Soon she realized she wasn't choosing anything anymore, not the horses she rode, not the duties she handled, not even the time she ended each day. He decided those things now. He did it softly, calmly, like he was doing her a favor, like guidance instead of control. But guidance that leaves no room for your own choices isn't guidance at all. When she stayed late to finish repairing a broken fence, he found her in the dark. She expected him to be annoyed. Instead, he stepped close, too close, and said, "You work too hard. You should rest. I don't want you hurting yourself." The way he said, "I don't want you hurting yourself," sent a chill through her. It wasn't worry, it was ownership. Quiet, possessive, unspoken ownership. She tried to keep her distance after that. Tried to spend more time around the other ranch hands. Tried to occupy herself with tasks he wasn't nearby to oversee. But every time she drifted even an inch away, he appeared. Like he could sense when she wasn't within reach. She told me the moment things truly shifted was the morning she planned to go into town. She just needed supplies, soap, thread, maybe a new canteen. She saddled her horse as quietly as possible, hoping to leave before the day got busy. But he was already waiting near the gate. She didn't know how long he'd been standing there. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. She tried to keep her voice steady as she told him she was heading into town for a few hours. He said, "No need. I sent one of the boys yesterday to get everything we needed." "We," not the ranch, not the hands, "we." She explained she wanted to go anyway, just for a short ride. But he didn't step aside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch her. He simply said, "You don't need to go." Not "you shouldn't." Not "I'd prefer if you didn't." "You don't need to," like he'd already decided what she needed. Like she wasn't meant to decide anything anymore. She told him she'd be back by noon. He told her she'd stay. The way he said it, flat, final, made something inside her twist. Not fear, not yet, but something close. She went back to work without leaving the ranch. Not because she agreed, but because she didn't know what would happen if she pushed. She didn't want conflict. She didn't want him angry. She didn't want to make anything worse. But avoiding conflict didn't stop the walls from closing in. He grew more attentive every day. When she walked into a room, he turned toward her. When she spoke, he listened with full, intense focus. When she worked alone, he joined her even if he didn't need to. And when she laughed, rare as it was, he looked at her like the sound belonged to him. She said the scariest thing about it wasn't his presence. It was how normal it started to feel. How she almost convinced herself that maybe this was just his way. Maybe he was simply protective. Maybe she was reading too much into nothing. But the illusion broke the night he brought her dinner. She was sitting outside the bunkhouse, brushing the dust from her boots when he walked up holding 2 plates. She thanked him, expecting him to leave. He didn't. He sat beside her, too close. Close enough that she had to shift her body to avoid touching him. They ate in silence at first, the sky dark around them, the night heavy and still. Then he said her name softly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was a claiming. "I take care of what's mine," he said, as if it were the most natural truth in the world. She froze. She asked him what he meant. He looked at her like she was slow to understand. "You work here, you live here. You belong here." She tried to laugh it off, but he didn't smile. His eyes didn't soften, they sharpened. "People out there," he said, nodding toward town, "don't know you, they don't deserve you. But I do." She told him she didn't belong to anyone. Not to him, not to anyone. She said it gently at first, out of fear of angering him, but his expression hardened, his jaw tight. He didn't argue, he didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he just stared at her with a look that felt like a locked gate. "You'll see," he said quietly. "In time." That night she lay awake long after the ranch went still, the words echoing in her mind. "You'll see," what did that mean? What had he already decided for her? And why, suddenly, did the ranch feel less like a refuge, and more like a place she was never meant to leave? She tried to pretend nothing had changed. She tried to wake up the next morning and treat it like any other day, brushing the horses, feeding the livestock, mending the worn leather straps on the tack. She tried to forget the way he looked at her the night before, the quiet certainty in his voice when he spoke those unsettling words. But when someone starts deciding things for you, you feel it. Even if no one says it out loud, you feel the shift like a weight against your chest, a pressure that grows every time you step out of line. All day he lingered near her, not close enough to touch her, but close enough to make sure she never forgot he was there. When she moved to the far end of the paddock, he followed a few minutes later. When she carried buckets to the troughs, he appeared again, taking the load without asking. She kept trying to act normal, but her heart beat too fast, her throat too tight, her hands shaking more than she wanted to admit. By noon, she felt suffocated. She had to get away, even for a moment. She told one of the hands she was going to check the back pasture. It was a lie, there was nothing to check. But she needed breath, she needed distance, she needed silence without his footsteps behind her. But when she saddled her horse, he was already there. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't even look at her. He simply took the reins from her hands and tied them back to the post. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but he cut her off with a tone so calm it chilled her deeper than any shout ever could. "You don't need to wander out there alone." It was the same sentence he'd been repeating in different shapes for days. She doesn't need to go to town. She doesn't need to check the fields alone. She doesn't need to ride unless he says so. Piece by piece, he was rearranging the world around her until there was no space left that he didn't control. That night, the ranch hands hosted a small fire by the bunkhouse. Nothing unusual, just some light music, laughter, tired bodies relaxing after a long day's work. Normally she would have stayed inside or gone to sleep early, but tonight she sat outside to feel less alone. She hoped the laughter around her would drown out the tightness in her chest. It worked for a few minutes. She even smiled once. But then the rancher stepped out of the shadows and the entire fire pit went silent. The music stopped. The men moved aside like his presence pushed the air around them. She could feel his eyes on her, heavy, sharp, claiming. "You should get some sleep," he said, nodding toward her bunkhouse. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't concern. It was a warning. She stood slowly, her stomach twisting. She didn't want a confrontation, not in front of everyone. But the silence from the men told her everything. No one would step between them. No one would say anything. No one would help her. She went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, trying to breathe. It was hours before she slept. And when she did, she dreamed of locked gates and footsteps behind her, and a voice whispering that she belonged to someone she never chose. The next morning she woke before sunrise. She didn't waste a second. Her hands shook as she packed her small bag, 2 shirts, a little food, a worn blanket. She didn't care if she left things behind. She just needed to get out before he woke. Outside, the ranch was quiet, the sky still dark. Her horse stood ready. She didn't saddle it fully. No time, she just needed enough to hold on. She mounted carefully, every sound feeling too loud in the stillness. She guided her horse toward the side gate, the one that creaked less than the main entrance. Freedom was just yards away. She could almost taste the cold morning air of the open plains. Just a little further, just a few steps more. Then she heard his voice behind her. Going somewhere. Her heart dropped. She didn't turn at first. She didn't want to see the expression she knew he'd be wearing, the one that wasn't anger but something far worse. Calm disappointment. The kind a man uses when he thinks something already belongs to him. She swallowed hard and glanced back. He stood only a few steps away, boots planted firmly, arms loose at his sides. No weapon, no raised voice, just that gaze that pinned her in place. She tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to say she needed a day away, a ride for herself, time to breathe. But her voice came out too thin, too weak, too obvious. His eyes softened in a way that made her stomach twist. "You don't need to run," he said, taking a slow step closer. "I told you you're safe here with me." She shook her head. She said she just needed space. He said she didn't. She said she needed time. He said he already gave her enough. She said she wasn't his. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him behind her. "You will be," he murmured. "You will be my wife. I take care of what's mine." Her body went cold. Wife. He wasn't asking, he was declaring, deciding. The future she never agreed to was already written in his mind. Something snapped inside her then. Not panic, not fear, something sharper. Something that reminded her that no one had the right to choose her life but her. She jerked the reins hard and kicked her heels into her horse's sides. The animal bolted forward so fast she almost fell. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew he'd come after her. She knew he wasn't the kind of man who let something go once he believed it belonged to him. The wind bit at her face. The sky opened before her. Hooves pounded against the earth like a drum of warning. And behind her, faint at first but growing louder, she heard another horse. He was coming, and she had only one chance to outrun the future he'd already decided for her. She didn't remember the moment she stopped hearing her own heartbeat. Somewhere between the first burst of speed and the sound of his horse behind her, her pulse blended into the pounding of the hooves. Dust rose around her, thick and dry, clawing at her throat. The cold air stung her eyes, but she didn't dare blink. She couldn't afford to lose a single second, not one breath, not one step. She leaned low over her horse's neck, feeling the muscles bunch and stretch beneath her. Every stride felt like it cost her something: strength, fear, time. She whispered to the animal, begged it, prayed with it. Not in words, but in the tightness of her grip, the urgency of her breath, the silent plea running through her bones. Behind her, the rancher's voice broke through the wind. Not angry, not shouting, just steady, calling her name. The calmness of it twisted something deep inside her, because it didn't sound like a man chasing someone who wanted to leave. It sounded like a man retrieving something he believed he owned. Something he would not lose. Not now. Not ever. The open plains stretched ahead, a sea of gray-blue under the rising dawn. There was nowhere to hide. No trees. No rocky cliffs. No tight paths where only one horse could fit. Just miles of empty land that exposed everything. Her fear, her desperation, her tiny silhouette on the horizon. And his silhouette, darker and larger behind her, growing closer with every beat of her horse's hooves. She urged her horse faster. The animal obeyed, even as its breath came out sharp and ragged. She felt its sides heaving, felt its panic matching her own. But fear pushed her harder than exhaustion ever could. She wasn't running for space or for pride or for some fantasy of freedom. She was running because staying meant losing herself forever. A small stream cut across the plains ahead, a narrow ditch, deep enough to break a stride if misjudged. She debated slowing down for half a heartbeat, but slowing down meant hearing him pull up beside her. Slowing down meant feeling his hand close around her arm. Slowing down meant going back, so she didn't slow. Her horse leapt across the stream, hooves scraping the opposite bank before gripping the earth again. She held on tight, breath shuddering out, but she made it. She didn't dare look back, but she heard the splash behind her and the grunt of the rancher's horse as it landed. He didn't stop. He didn't fall behind. He didn't hesitate. She'd never expected him to. The land rose into a series of low hills, rough and uneven. She aimed for them, anything to break the open flatness, anything to use the terrain to her advantage, anything to make him struggle, even for a moment. Her horse climbed hard, muscles trembling with effort. The ground slipped beneath them in loose gravel and scattered stone. She clung tight, choking on dust, fighting for balance. At the top of the hill, she risked a look back. He was closer, too close. His hat was gone, his dark hair whipped back by the wind. His expression was not rage, not frustration, just a terrifying calm focus. Like he was doing something necessary, not cruel. Like bringing her back was a duty, not a desire. He lifted one hand as if reaching for her across the distance. She tore her gaze away and kicked her horse forward. The descent was steeper than she expected. The ground dropped sharply, sliding into a narrow path carved by rainwater and time. It wasn't meant for horses, not at that speed, but she had no choice. Her horse skidded, stumbled, caught itself again. Her teeth clamped down on her lip to keep from screaming. One wrong step and they'd both go tumbling. Behind her, she heard him slow, not out of fear but calculation. That scared her more than anything else. He wasn't reckless. He was patient, determined. He would follow her no matter what terrain she chose, no matter how dangerous, no matter how far. At the bottom of the hill, the land opened again, but not wide. A narrow valley curved toward the mountains, a tightening passage, like the earth was closing in around her. She didn't know the land well. She didn't know if it led anywhere safe. But she followed the curve anyway, letting instinct guide her. Her horse's breathing grew harsher. Every exhale was a cry. Sweat darkened its coat. Foam gathered around its mouth. It had given her everything, but fear pushed her to ask for more. She whispered, "Just a little longer, please." The valley narrowed further. She finally saw it, a split in the land ahead, where a jagged rock formation created a tight passage barely wide enough for a single horse. Too tight for two. If she could get through it first, she might gain distance. She might disappear into the winding rocks. She might lose him long enough to find somewhere safe, somewhere unseen. Or the rocks might collapse, or her horse might slip, or the passage might lead to a dead end. But fear decides faster than logic. Fear chooses the only open door, even if it leads into darkness. She pushed forward. The horse squeezed between the rocks, scraping its sides, its hooves clacking sharply against stone. Her legs brushed the cold walls. The air tightened. She could hear her own breath echoing in the narrow passage. Behind her, hooves struck stone too. He was following. She pressed on, sharper, faster. The passage twisted, narrowing then widening, revealing a slope that rose toward the early light. She urged the horse upward, knowing it didn't have much left to give. At the last stretch, the rocks opened into a small ledge overlooking a broad drop, steep, jagged, brutal. The path ended abruptly, as if the earth had been split open ages ago. Her horse skidded to a stop at the brink. Pebbles fell into the ravine below, bouncing for what felt like forever. Her chest heaved. Her eyes burned. The fear inside her swelled until she thought it might crush her from within. But she didn't turn around. She knew he was there. She felt him behind her before she heard him climb the last few feet. His breath, his presence, the heavy certainty of a man who believed nothing, not distance, not danger, not her fear, would change the future he imagined for both of them. She held the reins tight, her eyes fixed on the ravine. She wasn't choosing safety. She wasn't choosing logic. She was choosing the only direction that belonged to her, forward.